Hello, welcome to week 7 of Formational Leadership. And this week we're going to continue in our reading on emotional intelligence published by the Harvard Business Review. Prior to begin reading this book, we were talking about systems theory. And it is this week in our readings that the concept of emotional intelligence conflates with systems theory. One of the most important parts of our readings is the first chapter on building the emotional intelligence of groups. And that is exactly what will conflate with systems theory, because one of the things that we had to consider in systems theory was that a church, a congregation, is not simply a group of individuals, but a church is a system that each individual works together within that group. Some have anxious tendencies, others have helpful tendencies, but you have to understand all of those tendencies as a group, all of that as a system. So when we're talking about developing emotional intelligence, the way that I can break this down is our leadership skills as pastors and leaders will come to naught unless we can raise the level of the emotional intelligence of the group that we're trying to lead. We have to, and again in systems theory, we talk about being a differentiated leader, that leader that stands above the anxiety of the congregation or above the anxiety of the group. And as a leader, we may have great emotional intelligence, but if we can't lift up the team emotional intelligence and the group emotional intelligence, then our efforts at formational leadership will fail. So what we want to do this week is think about how we can build group and team emotional intelligence. If you're a pastor with a staff, you know very well what it's like if you walk in one day and you're emotionally unstable or you're moody, how that reflects upon the whole staff, or if a staff member walks in and they have issues. But it goes to more than mood. We're talking about a day-to-day emotional intelligence of the group so that the team can work effectively together. Now, if you don't have a staff, you do have lay volunteers in a church, and the same principles apply. How do we as leaders help build the group emotional intelligence? So let's consider just a few things. Every team, every group takes on its own character. That character in the church should represent the character of a godly leader and ultimately the character of Jesus Christ. So what we want to do is focus on how we can continue to develop the character, the emotional intelligence of the group we're trying to lead. Now, team emotional intelligence is much more complicated than personal emotional intelligence because people interact at different levels. And all of that interaction, all of that systemic interaction affects the emotional intelligence of a group. The chief characteristics of someone with a high emotional intelligence quotient: awareness of self, awareness of our own personal emotions and how we feel from day to day, how we regulate our emotions, and then this awareness must develop into a social competence. Social competency skills that make us aware of the emotions of others and how we manage the emotions of others. Now, we're not talking about manipulation, but we are talking about engagement and managing the emotions of those within our groups and those within our emotional systems. A group, however, must extend to another level of awareness and regulation. In the group, all of us must be aware of one another's emotions, and we must understand how that we can help regulate each other's emotions. So what I'm suggesting here is that this level of emotional intelligence requires higher levels of intimacy and trust and integrity. Teams are more creative and productive when they can achieve higher levels of participation, cooperation, and collaboration. 3 basic conditions must be met before these kind of behaviors can occur: mutual trust among its members, a sense of group identity, and a sense of group efficacy. Let's talk about each one of those 3. Number 1, you've got to have mutual trust. In my mind, this is the number one reason why so many leadership interventions fail. is because as leaders we don't exhibit integrity and trust, and we don't extend integrity and trust. The most important thing that any pastor, any leader in a congregation does is develops this sense of integrity. We must have unquestionable integrity. Now, the thing that you need to hear me on this, even as we demonstrate and build up an integrity that is beyond question, the most anxious people in the congregation, those who have the lower levels of emotional intelligence, are always going to hold your integrity in suspect. You cannot allow these people to drag you down. You cannot allow these people to cause you to sacrifice your integrity. You exercise patience towards these people, you exercise care towards these people, but you don't allow these people to inflict or to infect the team, the group, or especially your own personal emotional intelligence. We also have to have a sense of group identity. People need to feel like they belong, and the way that we help them build that sense of belonging is that we allow them to take ownership. Their voice matters. How they feel matters. And so one of the things that we've got to do in building team emotional integrity is we've got to build a space so that all team members feel that their voice matters, and we demonstrate that by the way we allow them to speak and by the way we hear what they're saying and engage that conversation. And then finally, a sense of group efficacy, that this thing works together. Just use a sports metaphor, a basketball sports metaphor. If you've got 5 guys on the court and all 5 guys are exceptional in what they're doing, you've got exceptional guards, exceptional forwards, exceptional shooters, exceptional in ball handling. But if those 5 guys don't learn to work as a team, they can be beaten by a team with subpar talent. The best, most talented people in your team have to work as a team. And sometimes that means sacrificing our skills, but that always means helping one another build up their skill level. Group emotional intelligence means that we're deliberately bringing to the surface an understanding of how the team works. Another thing that we've got to consider when we're talking about building emotional intelligence as a team or as a congregation is that we're not imposing groupthink. This is one of the problems we have in Pentecostal and charismatic leadership and hierarchical church leaderships. And in churches that have hierarchical structures like the Roman Catholic Church or the Anglican Church, sometimes the temptation is to build a group think, and the same thing is even more so when you have churches that depend upon charismatic leadership in Pentecostal and charismatic churches. I'm the person of God, I'm the man of God, the woman of God, this is the Word of God, and therefore you're to think like I am to think. That's not what emotional intelligence is. Unity in the church is the key to formational leadership. Unity in the church is the mind of Christ. But unity in the church is not subsuming to a groupthink of the leader. Unity of the church must be much deeper than that. Unity in the church, the mission and vision of the church, must develop a way. We must allow a way, a constructive way of regulating emotions within the group by establishing norms which allow for confrontation and caring. Now, this is something that we're all uncomfortable with. We don't like the concept of confrontation. We think that it breaks the unity. I want to suggest that correctly managed confrontation doesn't break unity, but it actually helps build unity. We often don't like talking about the elephants in the room, the issues that really matter. As a pastor, I used to tell my council members that I'm willing to deal with the tough issues because only the tough issues matter. The problem is, the tougher the issue, the less likely we want to deal with it in a team situation or in a congregation. I remember several years ago, a wonderful couple with beautiful children in our church, faithful to our church and involved in our church, and then one day they just dropped out. I mean, we went several Sundays without seeing them in church. So, of course, I did the pastoral thing and went by to see him, the father. And he said, well, Pastor, there's just things going on at the church I can't agree with. And so I asked, what are you talking about? Well, a few weeks before, excuse my phone, a few weeks before, an integrated, a black-white couple had walked in, a black man with a white wife had walked into the congregation, and that was something they were not prepared to talk about. And even as I tried to engage him in a conversation about that, he was not prepared to talk about it. He just saw it as a conflict with his own moral values, and so they made the choice to leave the church. I regret that. As a pastor, the truth is I should have addressed it long before. I should have allowed a space where we could talk about these things. We already had an integrated church. We were reaching out and had black families in the church. But for some reason, this particular member was not ready for integration in families and marriages. So what I'm suggesting is we've got to find ways that with wisdom that we're willing to confront with caring these issues that will address the mission, that will address and affect the mission and vision of the church. Interpersonal understanding, perspective taking, and confrontation and caring. These are the norms that build the sense of group identity among the members. In other words, you're a pastor of a congregational system and an emotional system. That system is comprised of 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. But it is one emotional system. You're the leader. You're the differentiated leader. You're the one who stands above them. You're a part of them, but you stand above them. You're not going to allow their anxiety, their emotional lack of emotional intelligence to affect your leadership decisions. But at the same time, you need to discover how you can build the emotional intelligence of that congregation. And you've got to do that by building these resources within the group, developing strong teams within the church, allowing these teams to have difficult conversations. Right now in the Church of God, one of the difficult conversations is women in ministry. The answer for many of our colleagues is let's just not talk about it. They're so conflicted about it that they don't even want to talk about it. That's not emotional intelligence. In the politics of our society right now, the issue is racism. Many people just don't want to talk about it because it is so conflicting. And we feel like because we can smile at each other that we have solved the issue. But in our hearts, if we were to really talk about issues, we would find ourselves in conflict. So how do we build the emotional intelligence that we can walk into a situation of conflict and confrontation, and because we've got that spiritual maturity and that emotional intelligence, we can exercise the leadership of caring and the leadership of empathy. This is what it means to develop emotional intelligence in your congregation and the group that you lead. This is why it's so important to understand these skills and learn how to develop these skills. So this is what I want us to be thinking about this week as you read through the book. Other chapters in the book build on on this concept of team emotional intelligence. Chapters on resilience, chapters on incivility, and every one of these you're going to understand how this can affect your church and yourself as a leader in the church. Also, there's another video I'd like for you to watch this week. I think it will be helpful. I look forward to your questions and your conversations. God bless you.